It is said that to face the challenges of the 21st century, we may actually need to go back to school. Go back to school to learn how to think. My guest today is an expert in this field. He can be described as an authority on thinking and management, as well as a specialist on innovation and change management. He has a PhD in management from the University of New York, and also is an accredited trainer for Dr. Edward de Bono, the pioneer in the field of lateral thinking. He advises many multinational corporations in this field and is in Sri Lanka, in fact, to advise a large multinational on their human resource activities here. I would like to welcome Dr. Sunil Gupta.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The whole field of innovation and change management, and also this whole idea of learning to think afresh, if you will. Could you talk about it, and especially your role in it, what you do?
Sure. I think it's time now for organizations to relook at the way they do business. And one of the core competencies that are coming up is the competency of thinking. And unfortunately, none of us have been encouraged to think in the previous years that we've done business. We've all been encouraged to perform, to deliver results. And strangely, organizations have rewarded performers rather than thinkers. With the changing market situation, the world turning into a global village, lots of liberalization in different parts of the world, competition has really heated up. Competition has really increased in practically every single business area. I would say there's never been a time before where the need to think has been so great as of now. And the new millennium brings about this greatest challenge for us to re-look at the way we think and question every single thing that we do. And that's where perhaps Edward de Bono's approach and methodology of thinking and innovation fits in beautifully. The reason being, if we do not deliberately look at thinking as a process, and we just do it in a very cursory, in a very lackadaisical manner, we will not be perhaps be able to get the results of our thinking efforts. So where we come in is basically as change agents to insist that organizations spend a lot of time and effort in seriously looking and thinking on several issues, even things that are working fine. Because a very traditional view of thinking is that we need thinking only when there's a problem. And what we're saying is not to really look at thinking when there's a problem, but even when things are doing hunky-dory, everything is wonderfully fine, business is booming, everything is great. Perhaps that's a greater need to think at that time, because if you're looking at improving the business, that's a great opportunity to look at thinking there. So our work all across the Middle East and parts of Asia basically focuses on not just training, but basically facilitating organizations to move from the routine patterns that they've got into to a stage where they lead to a stage of surpetition. And that's a phrase coined by Edward de Bono, and a book by the same title as well, to surpass competition. The only way to surpass competition is stop looking at problems and start looking at opportunities.
Out here in Sri Lanka, I think we are just coming to grips with some of these challenges, especially vis-a-vis thinking, because the concept of thinking out of the box for a long time was not considered to be the done thing, especially given the way our hierarchies and structures have been established.
Sure.
So for a country like this, and I think this is your second visit here, as you see it, what are the challenges we face, and how can we overcome them, especially in this field?
Okay. In the last two visits, I've noticed that, specifically in this particular visit, that the whole economy is maturing. And with liberalization in a few sectors, competition is coming into areas which were hitherto protected by either legislation or government or whatever. I think the biggest challenge for Sri Lanka would be to perhaps match up with the hotting up of the competitive forces, and for companies that have been very complacent because they've been in a monopolistic situation in whatever things they've done in the past, to question all that they're doing. And for newer companies that come in to compete with the older ones who've enjoyed for so long the monopolistic situation, would be to perhaps do things much better than those who've been so long in this marketplace. Let's say there are companies that have been for 20 years totally protected by legislation. And if there's going to be fresh competition coming into those areas, to make inroads for newer companies is not going to be easy. So the lesson for Sri Lanka would be that the companies will have to think smarter in order to be competitive. And if they don't think smarter and not better than competition, lots of businesses may perhaps fizzle out in this whole race. So I think there's real challenges: thinking, innovation, creativity, doing new things, and thereby ensuring that the older ones remain in the marketplace and the newer ones still are competitive enough in grabbing a piece of the pie.
Could you maybe give an illustration in your experience, especially in the Middle East and elsewhere, of how this could, in concrete terms, actually help a company, for example, achieve a better bottom line following your approach?
Sure. In fact, traditionally, again, we're so conditioned in looking at controlling cost. And the moment we look at controlling cost, we think we're being competitive. Because if we control cost, we think our margins are much better, we're able to sell better. But that's not true, because comes a time in business where everybody's controlling costs. Everybody's perhaps trying to undercut one another. And the only differentiating factor then that remains is virtually something different that an organization can do. So our experience, which is with the Middle East, where markets have been complacent for many, many years, has also been similar, where organizations have to create a differentiating point for them to survive in the changing marketplace. Now, for them to survive in the changing marketplace, they've had to do things differently. Now, the only way they could do things differently is to think creatively and relook at every single thing that they were doing. Even if, as I said earlier, things working fine, question them. Question the logic of doing things in a particular way. Maybe they're wonderful. Maybe there's no other better way. But as we say, good is the enemy of the best. And quite often we stick to good ways of doing things. We don't look at better ways to do things. The whole philosophy of thinking is to always search for better alternatives, better ways to do things. So the moment organizations start focusing on better ways to do things, the opportunities will be so many. And we'll be out of the rut, out of the routine, doing things that were traditionally thought to be unthinkable, but will be successful. And that's been our results with even governments, by the way, in the Middle East. One of our biggest customers is governments in the Middle East who are beginning to question traditional ways of looking at businesses, looking at structure, looking at bureaucracy, looking at government legislation, government controls, and so on. A good example that I can share with the viewers today is the government of Dubai. The government of Dubai is a great example of using lateral thinking as a process into many, many areas that they operate on. Simple things like getting an industrial license. The whole procedure is so simplified. Instead of 10 different forms and 20 different things to submit along with an application, it's one simple form. And the form has in bold capital letters right on the top of the form documents that have to be submitted for an application to be accepted. So if you don't have those documents, don't even submit it, because it saves your time, saves everybody else's time. Within 24 hours, 48 hours, you get a response from every single government department that you approach in Dubai. Not only that, reissue of those licenses, which is revalidating them and getting for an extension and renewal, is so easy. You don't have to go to the government department anymore. They've got post boxes that are there in every major post offices. Without any postage stamp, you deposit your application into the letterbox. Your application comes back renewed into your post box. Now, that is how governments are thinking as well, because governments are realizing there's so much of inefficiencies, and the reason being nobody's ever thought about those areas. Nobody's ever looked at them. They're old systems, old forms that have just continued over the years, and nobody's had the guts to stand up and say this is wrong and there's another better way to do it. But the moment people have acquired thinking as a competence, they started to question and say, gee, this is not right. Maybe this was good for 20 years back, but for today's business, this isn't right. For today's government, this isn't right.
Yeah, we've got to take a short break right now.
Okay, thank you.
When we come back, the 6 thinking hats.
For deliberate and serious creativity, we need parallel thinking.
Welcome back. You refer to the 6 thinking hats as a process of problem solving. Can you elaborate more on this?
Great. It's a problem of 2,500 years. 2,500 years ago, there was Greek gang of 3 philosophers named Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. And they said, argue, argue, and argue to search for the truth. Unfortunately, we learned a lot from them, and we argue. Argument is very weak as part of the thinking process. With argument, we get into a defensive mechanism because we try to prove that we are right, the other person is wrong, and vice versa. Argument is also destructive because a lot of ego comes into play. The focus of thinking is lost. and we keep arguing with the result that we're stroking our egos and keep defending our favorite points of view. Unfortunately, law courts are based on similar models, as you can see. We have the defense attorney and we have the public prosecutor. Both argue to prove their points of view. It's a judge who decides whether the culprit is guilty or not guilty. He pronounces a sentence. Unfortunately, in business as well, we use similar thinking, which is very weak and very defective. Because argument, which is 2,500 years of age in terms of methodology, is very weak towards the whole process of deliberate thinking. For deliberate thinking, we need what is called as parallel thinking. For deliberate and serious creativity, we need parallel thinking. This is a phrase coined by Edward de Bono. In parallel thinking, we do not argue, but we think in parallel. And we look at all the dimensions of a situation or a problem to explore the problem in greater depth. So let's say we're looking at a situation, we're looking at a problem, and we know there's a deficiency, there's a deviation, or whatever. But rather than you and I say yes, no, and go by experiences and perceptions, which will not perhaps get us to a conclusion. So you and I put on one hat at a time in an allocated way, in a systematic way, and look at getting as much data by exploring the topic from a larger perspective. So example, we may start off with a white hat and say, hang on, we've got to put on a white hat for 2 minutes and let's look at whatever data, information that we have on the subject matter. So both you and I table our data, our facts, not speculation, facts, data about the problem together. If we don't have it, we don't comment on it, we move on and we say, okay, it's time for us to move on to another hat. Now that's a systematic approach that needs to be followed, which hat in which order. And that's where our company, Ideas Management Consultants, actually trains people to use the hats in a sequence. So once we've done the white hat, we say, let's look at what's caution here, what is devil's advocate here that we need to think about. What are possible dangers here? What is possibly likely to go wrong? So you and I together spend 2 minutes in looking at what could go wrong with this project for 2 minutes. While, let's say we are at the black hat, even if there's a wonderful idea that comes, we don't even talk about it. The reason being, it's out of place with the dimension of thinking that's going on. Once we spend 2 minutes on black hat, we say, let's now generate some creative ideas together. So you and I put on, symbolically as well as physically, if you wish to, a green hat and say, let's look at green creative ideas. Because green signifies creativity, green signifies fresh pastures. Let's look at newer ideas. This is one way to solve the problem. Let's look at other ways to solve the problem. Maybe we spend 2 minutes, we come up with some good ideas. We now want to build up on the power of those ideas. We want to make sure those ideas are practical ones. They've got certain benefits. We want to talk about the benefits. So we say, let's put on the yellow hat. The yellow signifies sunshine. Yellow signifies hope. The yellow signifies the benefits of doing something in a particular way. So you and I together explore the ideas by using our yellow hat. We've got the blue hat. The blue hat is basically the facilitator's hat. He makes sure no comments are out of place. Now, in a meeting, it could be an external person. It could be the chairman of the meeting. It could be somebody else playing the role of facilitator. It could be one of our consultants doing that. But when we're doing individual thinking, we've got to be facilitators of our own thinking process. And we can say, hey, that's a great idea, but doesn't fit in here. At the moment, I'm only looking at the negativity of doing something. Once we've used all of the 6 hats, by the way, the 6th hat is the red hat. The red hat has got to do with feelings and emotions. And things like feelings, emotions, we're told to be kept out of the workplace because you can show your feelings at home, not at the office. But not exploring feelings together in a team setting could be very damaging to the whole team process. Research shows the more we can table our feelings and emotions, the better we feel. And the Japs have caught that on very well. The Japanese today make sure feelings, emotions have a role to play in the workplace. So, in a very deliberate process, one of the hats of Edward de Bono is the red hat. With the red hat, you and I maybe spend 30 seconds or max of a minute, not too much time, because we don't have to dig through our feelings, but what's top of the cuff, what comes straight, top of the mind. So we explore our emotions and table them out. So that at least the bottle of feelings and emotions are out, and we feel good with our thinking process. So basically, use of the hats is so powerful that we can look at any problem, any opportunity, work together as a team without damaging the team process. In our network, we've got great results. In fact, in Singapore, the Singaporean civil service uses 6 hats for all of their major meetings. We've got some of the top oil companies in the world. In fact, British Petroleum, Shell, all are trained on the use of six thinking hats as part of the creative process. We've got IBM that's trained over the last 3 years, 40,000 managers worldwide on the use of six thinking hats. Prudential Insurance Company, the largest insurance company in the world, has trained all of its executives on six hats. They're so committed to six hats that six hats flags fly full mast alongside the flag of the United States of America outside the head office of this company. In DuPont, all of the carpets in the company are woven with six thinking hats. All of the conference rooms have six hats to remind all of the PhDs who are research scientists not to argue, but to work together using six dimensions of thinking and work together as a team. So it's a very powerful approach to get people to think together in parallel. And rather than argue, which is so weak as part of the thinking process, if we can do parallel thinking, we'll get so much out of the thinking process.
Edward de Bono has obviously been the father of this whole process of creative thinking, of lateral thinking. Could you talk a little bit more about his more recent research and...
Great. Edward has got two recent publications. One of the books is called Simplicity. Simplicity is got a very simple theme, that life needs to be made more simple. We've got complex regulations everywhere. Every single thing that we walk into a bank, we've got 20 forms to fill in, 10 signatures to be given, and so on and so forth. You walk into the post office, there are complicated procedures there. A simple illustration is perhaps the VCR at home. If you look at the VCR at home, you'll notice there are several features in the VCR that we don't even use at all. Yet, it is very, very complex. It's very, very complex. We're paying for that complexity. All that we need is simple functions. Eject, start, play, fast forward, rewind, and maybe a record function there. But we pay for all those features. It's time life is made simple. And the whole theme of simplicity is that there are several areas in our lives that need to be made simple. Right from government legislation to even the way we conduct ourselves. There could be a lot of simplicity to the way we do things. But unfortunately, life, civil service, governments, everywhere make things much more complicated. With the result that life is too complex rather than simple. So the whole theme of simplicity of Edward de Bono is the world should be a very simple place for us to live in. Everything should be simple. All of the bureaucracy should be cut down. Things have got to be simplified. Paperwork has got to be simplified. So it's much more an easier, happy life for population all across the world. He's also proposed in his book, and there are plans afoot for us to kind of put in motion in individual countries a National Institute for Simplicity. The focus of that institute will be to encourage the common population to come up with ideas to simplify existing situations. The approach is not to criticize, mind you. The whole approach of lateral thinking, creativity, simplicity is not to point on defects. You don't need thinking to point on defects. I mean, if you see the glass that's cracked, it's cracked. You don't need an intelligent thinking person to say there's something wrong with the glass. Here we're saying things that are working fine. There's no obvious defect. There's no obvious deficiency. People are accepting it as a way of life. Those are the areas where we need some serious thinking on. And that's where perhaps we need simplicity, where we take things for granted.
We've got to take another break right now. When we come back, thinking in the 21st century.
The best way to prevent a conflict and to solve a conflict is design-oriented thinking.
Think yourself, don't you, Mr. Adrian? Well, we haven't even started interrogating you yet.
Not only does our newest phone feature vibrate alert and an active flip.
Hello, help. I'm an agent of...
Sorry, wrong number.
It also has voice dialing.
Headquarters.
The new T18 from Ericsson. Now the T18 comes power-packed with SMS.
British Council presents Maroon Town, a vital and exciting 9-piece band which combines breakbeat, ska, rap, and dub in a high-energy musical fusion. Friday the 25th at 7:30 p.m. at the Vihara Mahadevi Park Open Air Theatre.
Welcome back. In Sri Lanka, we are very used to being judgmental. I mean, somebody is right, somebody is wrong, and I think my personal view, at least, the conflicts that we have both in society and some are acrimonious and violent, as you know, our own ethnic conflict, stems from the fact that somebody always wants to be right. I mean, there is no effort to look at problems in a common way. How has the Edward de Bono approach been used in the context of trying to solve national issues?
Wonderful. In fact, we've got current reports that Edward de Bono has been asked specifically to help out in the Irish crisis. We've had other situations in the corporate as well as in the civil service sectors in different parts of the world. For example, in Singapore, in Malaysia as well. More recently, the use of lateral thinking and six-satch is being made in the civil service. So this goes to prove that perhaps these tools have greater efficiency and effectiveness within the civil service, because civil service traditionally is very, very judgmental in everything that they do. And there's very little creativity in civil service in many parts of the world. There's set ways to do things, and that's followed without questioning other obvious ways that would perhaps be explored.
I'm told that Dr. Mahathir Mohamad is a...
Absolutely. He is totally committed to the whole process of lateral thinking and to the process of six-satch. In Singapore, it's mandatory for the ministers. If they have to be ministers, they have to go through the whole process of lateral thinking and thinking tools. In Singapore, even thinking lessons are now made mandatory into the school system. You don't get your secondary school qualification till you learn thinking as a competence. That's important they're giving to all of this, because they recognize that the root of all the conflicts is, I am right, you're wrong, which is one of the topics of Edward de Bono's books, which he wrote in the 70s. I am right, you're wrong is nothing but judgmental thinking because of our perceptions. And the reason why we get into a mode of I am right, you're wrong is because our perceptions differ. You and I may look at the same situation, we may perceive it differently. So more so in the civil service, there's a lot of problems connected to perception. People look at something, look at it from a very limited perspective at times. And people on the other side look at it from a different perspective, which could also be very limited. And that's perhaps a cause of conflict, because with two different perceptions, two different ways of looking at the same situation, common ground for agreement is very, very limited. So we need a methodology where people can see the big picture, people can see and widen their perceptions. If people can widen their perception and look at things from different dimensions, and rather than get into judgmental thinking, get into thinking by deliberate design. That's why Edward chose to call his book Serious Creativity. One of Edward's 56 books is Serious Creativity, where he says it's a deliberate process. We have to willingly say we need to resolve this problem together, and let's have some serious thinking, deliberate thinking out of design on that matter, rather than leaving it to normal forces, and that is getting into argument. Because argument is too easy. It's second nature. As I said, we've been taught to argue. I think the civil service, governments in many parts of the world, I would say perhaps even the India-Pakistan conflict, they seriously need to look at things from a different point of view. But a limited mode of thinking, it gets you into arguments, and it's a no-win situation for anybody. It's a lose-lose situation, because the one who's the winner out of the argument is actually the loser as well, because you're waiting for an opportunity to get back at the argument. So while you lose an argument, you lose it temporarily to win another round of the argument. So it's a very weak form, doesn't really give you a long-term resolution of any conflict. The best way to prevent a conflict and to solve a conflict is design-oriented thinking, which means a very deliberate process of building in serious creativity.
The whole issue of creating trust, because if you are trying to solve a problem, and as you say, if one wants to try to design a solution, there has to be trust built in to the network. And how do you arrive at that trust? How do you create that trust?
Good, very good. To our experience, more so in the corporate sector as well as in the civil service, it all has a lot to do with leadership. If the leadership is strong and the leadership is very determined to resolving a situation, resolving a problem, then it's much easier to build in the trust and get the parties to sit together and do parallel thinking. But where the leadership has got vested interest, whether it's a corporate sector or the civil service, anywhere in the world, then it's very difficult to reach a common ground of understanding, because the leadership has got a vested interest. Our experience in the corporate sector, which is a very good example, is these initiatives are a great success where the leadership is positive and does walking of the talk. But where the leadership is not positive and doesn't walk the talk, so superficially, let's say they use the six-satch, but outside the meeting they say, okay, wow, fine, this is great. We use parallel thinking in the conference room, but we're back to square one. That's a decision that I'm going to take. then it defeats the whole objectivity of the exercise. So objectivity is key. Leadership is key. And if I look at DuPont as an example, DuPont was very successful and is still successful as the world's #1 chemical company. And the reason being the leadership back in DuPont. The leadership which was by a man called Dr. Tanner, Dr. David Tanner, who headed the R&D and 12,000 research scientists, was possible because he could lead the 1,200 PhDs to think differently every time they were faced with a product development situation. So it's a leadership that is key in the civil service. It's leadership that's a key in the corporate sector. Walking the talk is key. Demonstrating that, yes, you mean to do and resolve a problem together, and actually living to the values of parallel thinking is key to getting the results that you want.
I suppose it has to be leadership that is enlightened enough to empower decision-making or a participatory approach. Sometimes leadership can be too authoritarian as well, I would think.
Absolutely right, because all of these processes, while we encourage people to think individually, there's a lot of group sharing, group think as well. And if you're using these processes in a group think or a group situation with group dynamics in force, we are going in for a very participative approach to the thinking process as well. While we're going in for this participative approach, we do need leadership and that has got a listening ear to the people in the organization, in whatever is the situation, institution, and so on. And listening to the voice of the people, listening to people's ideas, giving it serious thought, using less of the black hat. More often, civil service loves using the black hat. Can do it, not possible, we've tried it before, other parties, useless, we've done it before, look at what we trusted and look at what has happened, we relax this and look at the ripple effect of that. Civil service tends to get into more black hat thinking rather than any other creative process of thinking. And that's where perhaps civil service, very logically speaking, civil service needs 6-dimensional thinking. They need the creativity, they need the green hat, they need all of the thinking process for them to think differently.
The other, I remember reading in the Bono's, I think, latest book where he speaks of this as one concrete example where you go to court and the lawyers switch briefs, for example,
Yep.
and you argue each other's cases.
Fantastic, good example.
I mean, can you sort of walk us through that kind of approach?
Fantastic. Let's imagine there's a lawsuit on here, and I'm the public prosecutor, you're the defense attorney. I'll keep talking points as the public prosecutor to make sure that the person who's in the witness box or the defendant's box gets to the gallows. My job as a public prosecutor is to make sure that he gets a sentence. Your job as a defense attorney is to protect him from getting to the gallows, to make sure he's not sentenced, he's not proven guilty. Now, even if in my process of arguing I find there is a point that's against me, I won't raise it up. I'll try and subdue that. I'll try and destroy evidence. I'll try and move the court's attention to something else. I'll try and deviate. The reason being I'm afraid I'll lose the case. So Edward very rightly says, a good attorney will never use evidence that will make his case go haywire. But for many, many serious problematic situations in life, we need the approach to be different. We need to switch sides and perhaps see what other evidence we can get. See things from somebody else's point of view. Once we empathize, gather evidence from somebody else's point of view and look at things from a different point of view, perhaps we'll stop arguing in favor of getting the guy to the gallows and say, sorry, I was making a big mistake here. This guy is thoroughly innocent. And the wrong man was going to go to the gallows. The reason being, I never thought about it differently. My job was just to nail him and that's it. So the whole approach of thinking, which is where lawyers could argue against themselves rather than argue against another lawyer, would perhaps be a better situation in law courts as well. But then we taught how to argue.
Given the technology revolution that we are now facing, to some extent this type of new approaches to thinking is going to obviously be one way in which one copes with it and also innovates within it. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that, the technology revolution as well?
Edward's new book is New Thinking for the New Millennium, and one of the key examples he gives there is we're changing technology. Information could be just a couple of clicks of the damn mouse away. Just double click on the mouse with access to internet, you could have pages and pages of information. So information is no longer power, which was the case maybe 5 years back. Information was power. Population was information hungry. But today with information being available, the challenge is what do we do with that information? I may double click and get the 10 pages downloaded from the net. What do I do after that? is going to be the biggest challenge. So new thinking for the new millennium is stopping those arguments, re-looking at things that we do, generating more alternatives, and not picking on deficiencies, questioning things that are working superbly fine, no defect, and saying, let's have some new thinking on that. Maybe we'll come back to our existing matter of thinking. That's fine, but at least we would have given it some thought. And that's new thinking for the new millennium.
On that note, Dr. Sunil Gupta, thank you very much.
My pleasure. And thank you for inviting me to the studios. Thank you, and all the best.
My guest today was Dr. Sunil Gupta. The topic was learning how to think. I'm right, you're wrong. I win, you lose. Do we really have to look at issues that way? Do there have to be winners and losers? Cannot we all be winners? These are the challenges facing us in the new millennium. Equally, there are challenges that face us in Sri Lanka today. Can we detach our egos from the way we look at problems? Can we focus on solving problems rather than trying to win on every issue? I think this matters to us all. This is In Black and White, and I'm Milind Morogole. Good night.
And the Koala invites you to spend 8 memorable nights and 9 fun-filled days in Australia for only 96,535 rupees per person. For more details, drop by at the Regency Travels at 467 Union Place, Colombo 2, or call 693-718 or 674-130.